What's up, guys? We are the creators of Leveled Up Love, and we want to know if you are struggling with your relationships from a deep, heart-centered, connective way and in a spiritual way. Are you looking to really not just have a surface level connection in your relationships, but really feel like you're transcending to something bigger, both with yourself and with your partner? And that's what today's Heart2Heart interview is about. And we have a very special guest for you, and we're going to bring him on right now.
So I think, oops, while we're doing that. So just to remind you, we at Leveled Up Love are all about bringing you content that allows you to expand the joy in your relationships through conscious communication, through sacred sexuality, and through flexible modern relationships. So these heart-to-heart interviews are going to, hello Ashok, how are you? These heart-to-heart interviews are meant to bring experts to you that really allow you to think about relationships in a very different way. And here he is. Yay, the man of the hour.
Hello, how are you?
Oh,
Hope you're
can
well.
you hear?
We're,
Yes.
For those
Can you hear me?
watching, are you able to hear, Stef?
Hello, Ashok. How are you, my friend?
Ashok says hello. Let me see. So unfortunately, we can't hear Stef. Can you hear
You
us?
can't hear me. Okay, that's not good. You can't hear me? No.
So Ashok, you can
One
hear
moment.
both. Okay. That's very interesting. Let's try something else. Hello, Stef.
Can you? Can you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Pesky
All right.
microphone.
Oh, that's why I can't hear me, because you have a microphone in and
We're not consciously
there's
related.
no sound. Yeah. That's a good point.
All right. Well, fairly smooth transition, I would say.
Yeah, very smooth.
So, Stef is joining us all the way from Hong Kong today.
No. Hong Kong time, but Perth, Western Australia. Fremantle.
Excellent. And I brought Chrissy with me. Chrissy and Stef met on Facebook a short time ago, and we were really blown away by the content and the mission that you bring to the world, Stef.
Thank you.
So we would love to give you a bit of an introduction to our Leveled Up Love community.
Yes. So if anyone hasn't been familiar with Stef's post on Leveled Up Love or about Stef in general, I'm going to give you a quick bio. Stef is an international speaker, author, and coach. He's a top-tier mentor and trainer to professional sporting teams, professional individual athletes, Olympians, gold medalists, and elite special forces. And he's created a unique system on exploring peak human states and optimal relationships that also leverage the most from the body, mind, and heart integration. And with his extensive background in behavioral science and philosophy, as well as various Eastern and Western spiritual practices and healing modalities, he's created a structure to enhance the quality of his clients' lives and their relationships, and in essence, bringing them closer to their potential. So also, Stef has a great tagline, Relational Alchemist. And so he's able to help clients and practitioners achieve transformation in relationships through conscious communication, which is something that we all aspire to do. So welcome, Stef, and thank you for joining us here. And I just want to take 1 minute. Ashok mentioned that he can't hear anybody. Ashok, is that still the case? Can you hear us? Maybe because of the microphone. Oh! We're going to have a
He's out of control.
Oh my goodness. Oh, claps for days. All right. Well, good to know that you can hear us. And Daniel, hello and welcome. All right. So why don't we get into it? So You know, the first thing we want to talk about is why we've brought you here. Who is Stef Sifandos? You have such an incredibly diverse background: Ayurvedic medicine, life coaching, mindset, holistic health, neurolinguistic programming, tantra. You know, the list goes on. And you shared with us before that getting to this point was a pretty dramatic storyline for you. You struggled finding a path that really honored who you were authentically and honored your relationship. So we'd love to know a little bit behind the Stef story. You know, what was the tipping point or points that led you to this path?
Yes, thank you for asking the question. So essentially, the shortest way to answer that is pain. Pain was the catalyst for fear, and pain was the catalyst for growth. Essentially, fear and pain was a catalyst for transformation. And being in that space, really confronted with two choices: either remain on the path that was allowing me to not be authentic, and by authentic I mean that my inner world, or my outer world rather, was not matching my inner world. So my behaviors, my expressions, the way I interacted in relationships, the way I behaved, the way I treated other people wasn't really matching what I felt inside. And there were multiple fears around that, some unconscious, mostly unconscious, some conscious. So about 3 years ago, in an intimate relationship, in a romantic relationship, that came unraveled, largely based on my behavior. And of course, in any relationship, there's a dynamic. So there's always, there could be two or more people involved, but assuming complete responsibility for my role, I was dishonest in that relationship. I was disconnected in that relationship. I was very not present in that relationship. Now, that was because of a number of different reasons. And many men and women, in fact, move through this. It's not just men. It's a fallacy that we think that men are deeply unfaithful in relationships or deeply disconnected in relationship. Probably, yes, men are a little bit more, but the statistics per se are skewed. It's not like 80-90% men and 10-20% women. It's actually a little bit more even. And that's I suppose that's a sign of what is occurring systemically in our society, and how we are learning to navigate relationships or intimacy and understand that and connect to ourselves and to each other. So when that unraveled and came undone, I really had a choice to remain in that space, a very, very deeply ignorant, dishonoring, disrespectful space of myself and those in my life that I loved, and I really or completely transmute the entirety of my being. And I made the choice to move into the latter, which was again very scary at that time, because it was a complete reconstruction and defragmentation of self. I was very fractured in my movement through life. So I made a commitment and a decision to go deep, no matter what. No matter what the outcome or the process or the journey was, to just continue to go at depth until I could equilibrate and neutralize these unhealthy belief systems, these unhealthy patterns, these unhealthy constructs and models of reality, and the way I treated myself and the way I was treating others, which was very unfair, like completely unfair. And it's been a journey since then, an immersive journey. I have at times a fairly extreme personality, so I've got to really go deep, and I could go deep really quick. So it has been completely confronting, but completely revelatory and releasing and revealing. And it's enabled me to gain such deep clarity, profound clarity on myself and what I want from life, and also who I want to be to others in life. And fortunately or unfortunately, I've had to go to an extreme end of navigating relationships and navigating life in order to then come to a place where I know who I want to be in life and how I wish to treat others. And how I wish to honor the women in my life in particular as well, and revere the women in my life and revere people in my life too, and really interact and communicate with others. So that in short is has been the catalyst for my own my own personal revelations, and we all have this. Like, this is the beauty of it. We all have our own pain points. We all have our own triggers. We don't have our own operant conditioning, our social conditioning. We all have our own fear points that if we move into the depths of the collective and the individual shadow, we can really unpack who we wish to be and then begin to present that to the world. And that's authenticity per se. That's taking ownership of self and being sovereign in one's own posturing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's incredible. And one of the things that you mentioned just now stuck out for me. You talk a lot online about the masculine feminine dynamic. And I think what's so interesting about that coming to light now is it's almost the next stage of feminism, where before we wanted women to be the same as men. Now it's really about being equal, but very much not the same. So I love what you posted about the men being a palm tree for women during a storm. So could you speak a little bit more about how a man can really show up for a woman in that way?
Sure. And then I use the terms interchangeably as well. So we can use a term feminine, or we can use a term flow or be energy, because we're made of contrast. Like, the human being is made of contrast. And the masculine energy can be do energy or go energy. So we have that capacity to look at or observe, and it's a play on language a little bit, but that verbiage can make a difference to the way we interact with that information. So in relation to your question, sorry, I completely agree with you. We're coming into a time now where, and I love the word equity, and I love the word equity because we're not all equal as individuals and as people. We all come with different skills and different character expressions, different personality types, different gifts to give the world. Some similar, of course, but some different as well. And we have to celebrate that difference. So it's an equity that we're moving into. I really believe we're moving into a place now where there's coming gender equity is coming into play greater and greater. And the archaic models of the past, the toxic or extreme expressions of patriarchy, are really dulling down and need to cease. Now, there are many proponents that are going to oppose that, like within the collective, both men and women, because it's unfamiliar, and unfamiliar is fucking scary. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
Sure.
Okay. Oh, okay, cool.
Be authentic. Yeah. Be authentic.
Yeah. So it's scary for so many of us, and we want to avoid what's scary. We want to move towards what's familiar and comfortable because that's safe, and we want to move away from what's unfamiliar because it's scary. So moving in this space is cool. So when I speak to men being vertical or stable for the women in their lives, there's of course women can be vertical and stable as well in their own way, and it's a varying expression that takes place. But in context to men being that, it's about, when we hear that term, show up and hold space. And well, what does that actually mean? Because buzzwords are great and buzzwords are really important. I love buzzwords, but often we use buzzwords and we don't really understand what they mean. We don't really connect to them. Like, we just say them, sort of blasé, and so what the fuck does that actually mean? Show up. Or what? So for me, like, showing up and being present and holding space is a big part of that. And so I want to define that, because I don't just want to say these terms, and I want to define how I define them. And then if they resonate, fantastic. And if they don't, that's okay. But let's maybe add to that definition and build on it and really evolve it and make it exciting, make it really connected process and relationship that we can share together. So for me, showing up is coming to the party, coming to the relationship, which is what I did not do in full in my previous relationships, was coming to the relationship with all that you are. The good, the bad, the ugly, the shadow self, the stuff that you're embarrassed about, who you are as a whole person, because that makes you. Because otherwise we move in the world in relationship in fracture and fragmentation. We don't move in fullness and wholeness. So we're going to show up wholly for who we are. So when men do that, when men own their shit, when men own their stuff, because we're speaking to men in particular now, of course this applies to all people, but when men own their stuff, they are automatically, they become safer for women, because then it's the known. They're not hiding anything. They're not putting it in the unconscious knapsack and ignoring it and suppressing what's actually a vital part of who they've been or who they are. So that therefore they become familiar, they become known, they become safe. So women can then relax in their beautiful feminine expression. They can just relax in their being. And in that relaxing, they can be honest and open and authentic and vulnerable. So men need to show up vulnerably. They need to, in other words, they need to say, this is who I've been, this is who I am. These are some of my character flaws, traits, shadows, self, whatever it is, that's showing up. And holding space is allowing, in this sense, is allowing your partner, allowing the person that you're with, your friend, your colleague, your parents, your sibling, allowing that person to express themselves and not taking it personally, not being emotionally triggered by their stuff, right. Where then you turn that into yourself and you become hyper selfish, you become defensive, you become egoic in nature. And now that occurs consistently when we don't do the work, or we don't put the effort in to be ourselves, to explore who we are in wholeness, because it's unexplored terrain. So it's unfamiliar, and it's stuff comes up. The mind is, when we're looking at the brain as an example, like, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, and the amygdala, and the brainstem, and the way it stores information and memories, if we don't access some of those traumatic memories in our lives that have occurred in our past, that have occurred, during our lifetime in various relationships, if we don't address them and equilibrate them, neutralize them, understand them, have a relationship with them, move through them, it comes up unconsciously through implicit memory. Our environment will trigger, and we don't even know, we'll trigger these feelings of fear, and we don't even know what's going on. So we begin to react as opposed to respond. So when as men, when our women, and when I say our, I don't mean that in an ownership or possessive way. I mean ours, all of us as a collective, right? Let me clarify that. Yeah, and when we're not holding that space for our women because we're being triggered, we haven't done the work on ourselves, we can't then help heal them. They can't help heal us. Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of relationship, adult intimate relationship, is predicated upon, and Harville Hendricks, and we spoke about resources. This is a great resource. Keeping the Love You Find by Dr. Harville Hendricks. The seminary work that he's done in relationships is phenomenal, in my opinion. He's been in the space for 30 plus years. Phenomenal human being with respect to what he's done. And it's really simple. We're looking at our primary caregiver relationships, and they really influence, consciously and unconsciously, our adult intimate romantic relationships and all of our relationships, in fact, because we will search and we will look for, unconsciously and consciously, what we did not and what we did receive in our primary caregiving relationships, and then attempt to replicate that to neutralize and equilibrate and bring into homeostasis our inner psyche and our emotional self. And we do that. So we're going to be triggered in relationship. So if we can't hold that space for if we can't be vertical and stand tall, all we're going to do is just keep doing this.
Right.
That doesn't serve humanity. It doesn't serve us as individuals. It doesn't serve our growth, our journey at all.
Yeah. Is there a tool that you could suggest to someone where they're trying to relate to their partner and getting triggered? Are there tools, or I forget what they're called, rubrics, that they can use in the moment to sort of bring themselves back to equilibrium and show up for their partner?
Yeah, look, generally, and that's a great question. There's, if we're being triggered in the moment, and obviously there's a spectrum, so there's an intensity on that. If we're being triggered in the moment, we're generally either pain, fear, or trauma is arising within us, consciously or unconsciously, explicitly or implicitly. So in order to deal with that in that moment, a great technique for dealing with pain, fear, or trauma is connecting to the physical body, to the physical vessel. So we can do that through breath. We can do that through basic touch. We can do that through softening our tonality as well. We can do that by requesting that if maybe our partner or our intimate partner is in, and these are very simple techniques, but very effective, or highly effective. Mm-hmm. You have to have conscious agreements with respect to how you communicate. I mean, I've developed a conscious communicating model around this, and it includes a lot of this, and there's 12 principles in that. One of them is having conscious agreements in how you communicate. So, for example, if you are triggering each other or your partner's triggering you, there's a almost like a what do I call it? Sorry, I've got a brain block. Like a timeout card. There,
Right.
like there's a timeout card. So let's go. You go to the garden. I'm going to go down the beach. We're going to reconvene in half an hour. We're going to create some space, because in that space you can create reflection and silence and stillness. You can calm the physiology down. You can do some breath work. If it's really intense, you can come back and you can communicate again. Because there's nothing wrong with creating space amidst that intense communication. It will create clarity. It will create context and reference point. A very simple technique, but it allows us to continue to connect instead of breaking the connection and breaking the momentum. You think space, it almost sounds paradoxical. Creating space breaks momentum. Not at all. Not if the intention is to come back and reconvene. Because what happens is, as you're creating space, your energy, your attention is, so your attentive neural circuitry, your emotionality, your psychology, the way you feel is still on that conversation or on that communication or on that individual. And that's really empowering. Right? So it's powerful, because then you come back and you begin again and you repeat the cycle as often as you need to. Like Olympic swimmers, for example, train 4 to 10 hours a day. Like it's repetition. Repetition is a key to mastery. So if you want to master how to communicate consciously, effectively, in a connected manner, how to deal with our old stuff, we have to expose ourselves to it. And there's times when we have to take rapid, massive, transformative action. There's times when we have to be at peace and just being still, not take massive action, just reflect, observe, be in silence and stillness. That's deeply useful and helpful as well in many ways.
Mm-hmm. So you would actually be okay with having saying consciously, let's take a minute to give us each other some space and come back when we reset?
Yeah, look, it depends on the circumstances, of course. But if that doesn't call for it, maybe it's just taking 1 or 2 minutes in each other's presence and breathing. Oh. And if really deep stuff is coming up, it's actually touching the body, knowing that you're still here in the body, knowing that, because you want to come back to the body, like literally just doing this, literally doing this, and also verbalizing what is coming up if you can. So important. Studies have been done that. So, and I wrote a post on this the other night. I don't know if I put it on Leveled Up. I can't remember. But so studies have been done where the simple act of expressing verbally, or even in the written word, it decreases the activity in the hypothalamus and the amygdala, which are in part responsible for for fear, for connecting to fear, fight or flight, understanding, releasing of stress hormones and so forth, cortisol, noradrenaline, adrenaline. So by verbalizing, we decrease that. So if this isn't the brainstem and the amygdala isn't super active, then we can come from a more open, expansive space, and our perspectives change. And when our perspectives alter and transform, we can see that situation differently, and we can see a way out. Instead of feeling stuck and constricted, we feel more open in our being, in our heart space. So verbalizing is really important in that moment. You don't have to create space. Creating space is a very masculine thing. It's a very go energy. It's a very do energy, creating space.
Okay.
The feminine doesn't.
I was thinking about what you were saying, because I think for women, talking is a connector, and for men, maybe touch is a connector, or taking space so that they don't do something or say something that they regret. And that's conditioned maybe by because a lot of men and women grew up in certain ways.
Correct.
But I just I love the idea of having agreements before you fight, so that that you're playing by the same rules. Because I think in a way, if somebody walked out on me without understanding that was his way of taking space, that would feel like abandonment for me.
Absolutely.
Trigger, right? So coming to those agreements beforehand is so powerful. I love setting the rules of engagement so that nobody steps over the boundaries that they can't come back from.
Yeah, and it's that's coming from a place of sincerity and endearment and care and love and reverence and respect for each other. And it's as simple as how do you make the bed? How do you have dinner? So for example, like, because this is really interesting. Well, we don't pay much attention to this. Okay, this is really interesting. So we have dinner, and then some people, before they actually sit down to have dinner, prefer to, this is real life stuff, right? Prefer to make sure the space is clean. And some people want to have dinner and then clean up after, or maybe the next morning or whatever. Everyone has their own preferences. Now, let's say you don't talk about these small nuances, right, that occur in your daily household, in your interacting, in your connecting, okay? It's interesting how we've gone from like the ethereal, the highly spiritual, right down to the
These
washing
are the
dishes.
things that matter, Steph. Like the little
They
things.
do.
Still have to
Make
eat
a
They do.
spiritual dinner.
They do. Yeah, they do. So let's assume that's happening over time. Let's assume that maybe the man prefers. It doesn't really matter who, but the man prefers to wash up before he eats, and the woman doesn't. That's his conditioning. But let's assume that he's got a real deep emotional trigger to that, because he's associated some form of violence or trauma or issue or fear with a protocol around dinner. Now, we don't know. Like, he maybe doesn't even know that.
Absolutely.
He doesn't even know that. So but he does know that. He does know by habit that he prefers to. He may not know why. That's irrelevant at this point. But he prefers to clean up before he sits down and eats. Now, if they can just agree to that, then what you're doing is you're not allowing that trigger and that trigger to be associated with someone that you love and care about, which complicates the dynamic so much. So these things are so important to talk about our conscious agreements or unconscious agreements that we have with ourselves and in relationship, and make them conscious, make them available to each other, to ourselves. That's so powerful, so powerful.
And I love the comment. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
I love Andrea's comment. She said, "I loved when a partner said, I want you to fight with me, not against me." That really resonates because we have kind of our own hashtag here, which is team relationship. It's whose team are you on? Yourself, your partner, or the actual relationship?
Yeah.
So I think that is so powerful. And I think the more that we understand our own blueprints for communication based on our past life experiences and our conditioning and whatnot, and who we want to be, who we want to show up as, I think that's amazing. And I think we have time for one more question. So there is a topic we haven't touched on yet. And it is a main topic of this group, which is really achieving closeness through sacred sexuality and through enlightened sexuality. So, we'd love to know what erotic growth, if that's a piece that you work with your clients, and what does that mean to you, and what does that look like?
Yes, beautiful question. It's an integral part of what makes us human. It's an integral part of what connects us. And I come back to that term that I often use is selfish selflessness. And it's been in section, there's various kinds of intimacy. There's at least 11, 12 expressions of intimacy. And physical intimacy has its own breakdown as well. So sexual intimacy is part of physical intimacy. Touching hands, hugging, that's physical intimacy. Sexual intimacy is a part of physical intimacy. And it's about taking the time to know each other, taking the time to cultivate and build trust. And when we build trust in a relationship and we put the effort in, the sincerity to do that and to be in that space, we allow ourselves to be more open in compromising or what would be perceived to be compromising positions. So we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, there's a reciprocity that takes place, generally speaking. Not always, because some people are really consumed by their fears. And it's so important that we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and cultivate trust in that dynamic. And when we share that trust and we are able to come from a place of more openness, the way we interact sexually, it enhances like dramatically. And again, communicating that, whether it be verbalizing that, whether it be communicating that through non-verbal cues, talking to each other about each other's love languages as an example. What's his name?
Right.
I've forgotten his name. That wrote that book, the 5 love languages.
We'll put the link in the
link in.
comments.
Yeah. And also understanding not only your love languages, but your, the way you engage passionately, your erotic language as well, your erotic love language as well. So, are you, because people see in one of my models, a conscious relating model, it's a program as well that I have, and there's 12 principles in that as well. One of the principles is around sacred sexuality and sexuality. And what that means is knowing self deeply. Like we are so repressed in this society in so many ways. Yes. Probably women more so than men because of the constructs and the barriers and parameters in our society. And there's more oppression, and women are more ostracized for expressing themselves sexually. They are judged, they are critiqued. Whereas men are seen differently. And that had a huge effect on our psyche and the way we actually connect with each other as well. So really gaining clarity on what your sexual preferences are as an individual, how you choose to sexually intimately relate. What are some of your greatest fantasies that you'd like to engage in? But you can't just tell anyone that. You have to cultivate trust. You have to be, there needs to be trust. I just got to pitch. No, that doesn't work. But there has to be trust there just for you to feel safe enough and held enough to be able to express yourself.
It's the most vulnerable space in many ways.
It is. So before we even get to any form of physical act, it's about knowing yourself. It's about, and there's layers to self. There's so many different layers to self. And it's knowing those various layers in as many expressions as possible. It's a never-ending journey. There's no finite apex point or tipping point. I finally know myself, I'm liberated. It's not, the more you know, the less you know. It's Plato said that. It's in many other marvelous minds. But it's about knowing self and then learning how to express that. But also then learning how to communicate consciously, how to cultivate trust. What are the tools and techniques that you can use to cultivate trust, and knowing that it takes time. It's exposure. Like it doesn't happen overnight. Like it takes time, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a beautiful thing. And when you find the right person, people that are aligned with your values, because the more clarity you gain in yourself, the more clarity you bring into your life. And as you bring that clarity into your life, you can relate to them with greater efficacy. Now that's really powerful in and of itself as well. So sacred sexuality begins with the self. Learning to connect begins with the self. By no means am I a tantric practitioner. I explore the world of tantra, the essence of tantra, like Shaivism and non-dual tantra, the philosophy, the ethos of tantra. Like as an example, is a beautiful resource. Tantra Illuminated. Beautiful book. And this really speaks to the philosophy of tantra. And I've practiced. I've gone to courses and so forth, etc. And embodiment practices and practice those myself as well. And sexuality is actually a very small part of the ethos and philosophy of Tantra. It's a very small part. It's really the smallest part of it. But most, the mainstream thinks that Tantra is all about some Kama Sutra funky sex. It's got nothing to do with it. But it's about knowing self and connecting to self first in order for you then to really be able to be open and express with clarity, hey, this is what I want, this is who I am, does that serve you, does that suit you, this is what I'd love to be able to give you, and what do you need? Asking your partner, what do you need, what do you want, what do you like, what do you enjoy, and again, showing up and holding space. In other words, knowing that yes, you may be triggering them, but not taking it personally, if that's the case, if that occurs, and holding through that, because the more we create intimacy through challenge and intimacy through that difficulty, through that clashing of the shadow selves, the more trust we cultivate, and the more we can explore our sexuality, which is one of the most vulnerable spaces to be in, right? So that's the power of knowing self. And when I say knowing, I'm talking about gnosis. I'm talking about not just intellectual cognitive knowing. I'm talking about emotional, relational, spiritual, social intelligence. I'm talking about knowing self-gnosis, wisdom around self. The vast difference between just intellectually, that's one part of it.
Right. Well, I love that. I mean, letting your shadow selves do battle and knock against each other will allow you to. It's true in some of the darkest moments in relationships were the ones where the intimacy became strongest. I can say that. But this was so fascinating, Stef. We have to run, but loved having you on.
Thank you.
Tell folks how they can keep up with you.
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate the opportunity for speaking with you. It was a beautiful conversation. Thank you so much for having me on. StefSifandos.com, StefSifandos.com. It's my website, and you can find all my social media from there. But it's all the same, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Stef Sifandos. So on my Facebook page is Stef Sifandos Relational Alchemist. It's fairly straightforward. The website will take you to where you need to go if anything resonates.
Awesome. And if you're watching and you have any questions or comments for Stef, please post them in the comments. We'll definitely answer them even after the live is over. Tag any friends that you think might find this interesting, and be sure to tune in for our next interview. So with that, we're signing off.
Yes.
So thanks
Thank
everyone.
You so
thanks,
much.
Stef.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you so
Cheers.
much.